بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah we're here to talk about the suspenseful figure that everyone is suspensed about, called Barbarossa. Inshallah. The kids, how does a pirate look like? It's a question to the kids. What does a pirate look like? Describe to me a pirate. An evil pirate, what does it look like? Yes, yeah, go ahead.
A pirate is like a person who robs, goes on a ship and robs other people, and he has a captain hat and sometimes an eye patch.
Okay, and what else? Does he have a beard or he doesn't?
Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't.
Okay, and you're talking about like Captain Jack Sparrow. Sometimes he doesn't.
I don't know. There are a lot of different famous pirates.
Okay, good. So from the adults, like what usually is the normal depiction of a pirate? Like what usually would you see? You see, so if you see the specific character which is found in cartoons, which is found in movies, Barbarossa, so the depiction of it is quite evil, right? So they want this person, he's just after other people's money. He just wants to, he's, as he said, he's a pirate. And specifically the character of Barbarossa is shown as someone, not very honorable person in most of the movies. Some of the movies I was checking, they go back to 1948, right? I forgot the movie's name, but like there's a movie in which the whole movie is on Barbarossa. And then they show his character as a womanizer and all of that stuff. So it's, and then there's so many similarities with the Muslim Barbarossa. So when you actually read about that, you actually find that there was, and I'll tell you what happened, right, when the Pirates of Caribbean were being planned in this character. Anyhow, so we're going to get into the story of Barbarossa. Before we get into the story, some preambles. It's very important. So history, obviously whenever it is written, there's always two sides to that. So if there was a battle, two sides, one won, one lost, the one that wins is going to have a lot of stories to tell. The one that lost is always going to minimize that win somehow, right? So you keep that in mind, right? That most of the history, so when I was researching about Barbarossa, you find events that were in the Muslim side, a whole lot exaggerations to that, but then you also find like, when it was documented by the Crusaders, even that was exaggerated. The thing about Barbarossa is what's so unique is most of his history, when he retired, one person gave him an idea and said, you know what, we're never going to know about what you did. So why don't you take time out of your life and for our sakes and the generation's sakes, write all of this. So he wrote, it's called Ghazawat Barbarossa, and he wrote 5-volume book, which is till today, if you go to Istanbul, you can actually find that book in Topkapi Museum. You can actually go there and actually see those physical journals that he wrote. Then later those journals were transcribed into English and Arabic language and different, I don't think it's in English, but in Arabic, Turkish, and I think it's being translated by a guy called Edward Williams or something in English. Okay? So, let's start the story. Where does all this begin? Let's first. So, Barbarossa, or Baba Arruj, he was primarily born in the island of Lesbos. His father actually belonged to an elite force for Saleem al-Awwal, Shahzada Saleem al-Awwal or Sultan Saleem al-Awwal. This was like a special task force. The royal force that had missions, and they would just go and do things and then they would come back. So one of the missions was to go to the islands of Lesbos, and then there was a mission that they had to accomplish. In reward, his father was given a huge piece of land in the island of Lesbos. And that is where his father Yaqub, he married a Greek widow named Katrina. And then there's no mention of whether she accepted Islam or not. I could not find anything about her. Her name is mentioned, but we don't have mentions of whether, she was an Orthodox Christian. If she converted or not, that's not mentioned. And then she had 6 children, 2 daughters and 4 brothers. Around 1478, his other son, so Yaqub's other son, Barbarossa, was also born. His name was Khidr. Okay, Khidr. Now in Turkish, if you go and read, so you'll see this. So what they do in Turkish is like they try to remove these letters. So in Turkish it's called Hidr. Okay? But actually in Arabic it's called Khidr. So his name was Khidr and he was born in 1478. And he was technically to be the future Barbarossa. So there were 2 Barbarossas, not one. Now, so what happens around between 1480 to 1500, the father, he retired from the army and he starts creating pottery. So he becomes a pottery expert and he starts exporting that pottery to different areas. Now let me take you to this visualization of where all of this is taking place. So I did some. So this was the island where Arruj was born. This was around this area, between the Nappies and the Persakiva, whatever. That was where he was actually born. So if you zoom out a bit, you actually see the island. And so basically what happened was that, they started the expeditions. So they started going all the way here, down, up to the European. You can actually see that, right? And then they also went all the way down sometimes to this area. Like all the way down here. So this was all in the time frame of 1480 to 1500s, right? In 1500, when he was in Tripoli, he was actually embarking on a mission. And on his way back, he left from Tripoli, and then the Knights of John, the Crusaders, there was a Crusader, there was different Crusaders, so the Knights of St. John Crusaders, they actually ran, they crossed paths and there was a battle, and Arruj and his brother Ishaq, they were both captured. Right? So the Knights of, it's called Knights of Hospitallers or also Knights of St. John's. There's 2 names that they're given to that. Then, when he was captured in 1500, he was sent to a prison. This is called the Castle of Bodrum in Arabic. Now let me take you there. So they've actually created a 3D imagery of that castle today on Google Earth. Right? Now, let's talk a little bit about this. Am I still in the frame? Cool. Right, so you see this mosque here? This mosque did not exist before. So when the Muslims, later on you were going to talk about the conquest of how the Muslims won this. So right now imagine Arruj is still in the prison here. He finally escapes. But then just remember this mosque, and we're going to talk about this in the 1529. When I get to 1529, remind me. I'm going to tell you a story about the mosque and then how this whole castle turned into a place where Muslims actually then ruled. Now, so something very interesting happened. So when he was in that prison, a few things were happening. Do you know, how many of you know galleys? Galley ships? All right, so let's first, before we tell the story, all right, let's show you guys what a galley looks like. Right, do you guys see this here? So it was a ship, and in this blue area that you see are slaves. Okay, so the tradition was the Europeans, they would use galleys, and the Muslims were the slaves over here, and vice versa. So now we know galleys. Let's go back. So 1500 to 1502, at the end of 1502, he actually figured out the whole castle. Right? And he was a smart man. So in 1503, he made an escape. And the idea was for this escape, and I think, let me show you. Huh? kind of like a Shawshank Redemption. So you saw that castle. From there, he sailed. So let me show you, let me zoom out so you guys can actually see how big this thing was. So he was imprisoned here. So here's how the story goes. Basically, he actually, in the middle of the night, escaped, found a ship that had drunk crusaders, and they completely lost it. He pushed pretty much a lot of them off the ship, took hold of the ship. Now imagine, this is a ship, and he was all by himself on that ship. He threw all the oars out, and then he sailed that ship, that huge ship that would require sometimes 200 men, to work in the galleys and to work the oars. Those 200 men, he throws all that, he sets the sail, and then there's two stories for this. Okay, so the first story says that he sailed from here out all the way to Antalya. I was like, cool. Just 2 hours before coming, I was still reading, and I came across in one of the Arabic texts. The other story says, I didn't have enough time to show you, but I can actually tell you what happened. So the other story says that from here, he actually sailed because, the ship that he got on, he did not know direction. He didn't have anything at that time. So he sailed and he kept sailing, and he ended up in Sicily, or the kingdom of Naples over here. Over there, he got onto another ship. He hijacked another ship, and from there he recognized where he was, and then he sailed all the way back to Antalya. Right? So there's two stories, two accounts to that. In any case, right? So he escapes. The idea is on 1503, he escapes and he sails all by himself over there. So you guys can actually see the... Yeah, so this is the castle. This is the picture of the castle. 1502, that's where he was in prison. This was the path that he took. We talked about this. Now, and then he actually... so basically in 1503, when he escaped, he actually ended up coming to this place called Antalya. Over there in Antalya, he actually met a very important person. Okay, and I've actually mentioned it over here. His name was Shahzada Kurkut. Shahzada Kurkut was either the nephew or a cousin of the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan at that time. He goes to Shahzada Kurkut. They recognize the value of this man. This guy has sailed either from Italy back here or from the castle of Bodrum all the way down by himself. And he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you 24 galleys. I'm going to give you 24 of these ships. And we're going to create our first naval fleet. First Ottoman naval fleet. So the first Ottoman naval fleet is under the command of Arrouj or Barbarossa. And basically the idea was that the Knights of St. John, I mentioned this over here. So basically the Knights of St. John's, they were actually on a constant upfront. So all the trade routes for Muslims, they were actually attacking, and there needed to be some sort of an offense. They recognized that they need to back off. So this new naval fleet was set up. What Shahzada Kurkut told him, that listen, where our real issue is in this part of the world. Where is that world? So our real issue, so this is Antalya, so our real issue is here. So in 1504, they come to this place called Jirba, and this island over here, and they make this their first base, Jirba. Jirba today, unfortunately, this was one of the places where a lot of the Ottoman expansion took place. Today is an island known for partying and clubbing, and it's a vibrant nightlife over there. A lot of people go there for that, and a lot of people in there. I watched some of the videos of even some of the monuments of Barbarossa. You find the youth actually breakdancing on those. There's actually clips of them putting on speakers, and they're completely oblivious of their history, that what that person did for them and why that place, and they are Muslims today. So anyhow, so what happens is they go and they actually talk to the Shahzada, and then they form their first Now let's look at the beauty of that place. It's super, super beautiful, Jirba. So Jirba becomes the first one. That, not only that, when they are sitting there, they actually go to Abu Abdullah, who is actually the ruler in Jirba and the surrounding areas, and he says, listen, we also want one more place. This is too far. This is, if you look over here in the scheme of things, their goal is to be able to cover this area. So they are more interested in all of this. Right? And this is too far, so they needed to get closer. So they come and they create a second base in 1504. They come over here, they request permission, and then this second base was created for them, or they took over. So this is really beautiful because, you can see, those of you that actually sailed, or you've actually been to the sea, like this would be a bay, so usually it's really calm and you can do a lot of work. Apparently this bay became the factory for their ammunition, the factory where they were building the latest, whatever they were learning in terms of like technology, and they were applying those technologies to the ships. So a lot of the ships would be built over here, and that was actually a base where it's from this, they would, any ship comes up, the whole fleet comes around. If there was any fix up that they needed to do, so everything would take place in this place. Now, there was one condition. Yes?
Where is Jerbanam? Which area is that?
So it's in...
Which country?
Yeah, I'll show you. So I've actually hidden all the countries and stuff. So this is over this side of it. This is all Tunisia, Libya, and then this is Maghrib al-Arabi. Algeria, and then Maghrib al-Arabi. So this is all Tunisia. Right there. See that? It's all North Africa, yeah. So if I zoom out, you'll actually see.
But close to Europe, but North Africa.
Yeah. So this is Africa, and then this from here, this whole thing was 4 major countries. You have Tunis, you have Libya, you have Algeria, and you have Maghrib. Those are the 4 major countries here. This was called Maghrib al-Arabi al-Azim, the Great Maghrib. So this whole thing was the Great Maghrib. And there were a lot of Muslim heroes that came over here, up until like 50 years ago. Right? Abdul Karim al-Khattabi, for example. If you go and read the history of Abdul Karim Khattabi, he was from Al-Maghrib, and his story is fascinating, right? So, back to our second base. So then what happens? Saleem al-Awwal, he commands and he gives Arruj the first command. And he tells Baba Arruj that you're going to sail from Antalya. So, they're back and forth. Antalya is the headquarters, Istanbul is the headquarters, so they're going back and forth. So from Istanbul or Antalya, you're going to now start these smaller expeditions because Gharnata or Spain has fell, right? Gharnata and Spain has fell. Around the same time, you have in the Indian subcontinent, the Nawab of Bhopal, he's also losing power. At Bombay, the Bay of Bombay is coming under the control of the Turks. Now, there's Turkish expeditions that went all the way to Sumatra. So you have people that were actually sent, and they traveled and sailed all the way around the world because there was no canals at that time. They sailed, and then they ended up in Sumatra, and they actually secured Indonesia from the onslaughts of Portuguese at that time. So again, this is all happening at this time. The Gharnata has fell. So Sultan, he recognizes that the Muslims in Gharnata, they need to be protected somehow. So we need to protect them. So his mission was to go all the way from Istanbul or Antalya, all the way to Spain. In between, there's a whole bunch of Crusader armies, navy fleets. Past all of them, arrive at Gharnata or Valencia or these ports, and then rescue Muslims and take them to Maghrib. So to visualize what this was is like, so basically what he was asked to do is from here, okay, in Istanbul, sail all the way down here, go all the way here, and land at Valencia. This is where Valencia is, right? And then take the Muslims, and from there bring the Muslims to Algeria, to these, the northern part of Africa. And he was so successful in doing that, that the Andalusian culture was that when they respected someone, they would call him Baba, because the Muslims were influenced by the Christian culture there, which is Pope or Baba in Arabic. So they applied the name Baba Arrouj. The person's actual name was Arrouj. Barbarossa's real name was Arrouj. But then they started calling him Baba Arrouj. Now when Baba Arrouj, he started traveling towards Italy and the European areas, they couldn't say Baba Arrouj. So they messed up the name and they started calling him, in the English text, they started calling him Baba Arots. And from there, Baba Arots, Barbarossa. And then, and actually Barbarossa means the red bearded person. So the word, it was Baba Arots, but then they're like, hey, but he's got a red beard, we better call him Barbarossa. Funny thing, Barbarossa is not one character, there's actually Christian Barbarossa too, that came further down the road. Right? And he's also a red-bearded person, and he has these images and pictures of, him being a red-beard, fierce warrior. Right? So that was the mission, and he successfully completed those missions from 1504 to 1510. So from 1504 to 1510, this is what he was appointed to do. Now something very interesting happens. When he is doing that, in Algeria, right where we were, in Algeria, right? Jijili, let's go here and visit our. I guess it's not working. Well, eventually if the internet comes. So anyhow, so basically what happens is there was a ruler over here in Jijil, and he actually requested Barbarossa and them, and he said, listen, we are being heavily attacked by the Spanish. So we need support. So you need to come and help us. So they said, fine. They came and they took the port from the Spanish people. And then the people of the town, they said, our ruler is a tyrant. So help us throw him, since you've done us this favor and gotten rid of the Spanish, just help us get rid of him too. So they actually came and the guy who sought help, they actually overthrew him, took over the kingdom, and then they became the rulers of Algiers. Soon their power actually grew, right? To the extent that you see this whole area in Africa, so this is Algeria, this whole area, they became rulers of that. Now what actually realized, and this is a very important, the first lesson that we're going to learn here. He now became the Sultan of the 7th or 8th largest country in the world today, in size. So he is now the Sultan of the 8th largest country, and another estimates around the 10th largest. So top 10 largest countries in the world. And then he recognizes that it's not in the favor of the greater Muslim Ummah for me to remain in power. Because if I only worry about my kursi, then the greater Ummah is going to have major losses. But rather it is better that I unite this kingdom of mine with the greater Ottoman Empire, his hometown, with the greater Ottoman Empire, and actually strengthen the Muslim Ummah with this huge country. So he sent a letter to Sultan Saleem al-Awwal, and he said, I am gifting you this whole kingdom of Algeria as a province of Ottoman Empire. So he accepted the province, he accepted the Sultan, he accepted the gift, and then he made Arrouj, Baba Arrouj, he made him the Bey. How many of you watched Urtughul? Come on, raise your hands if you watched it, man. Anyone watched Urtughul? Okay. So, huh? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so in that you actually see, it's all like everyone's like Urtughul Bey, Gunduz Bey, this Bey, that Bey. So Bey basically means a governor, right? So he became the governor. And not only that, there's also this thing, the Beylik. So they also gave him the Beylik, which means that he's the greater governor. So all governors report into him, right? And then later on, he was given the title of Basha. There was a certain rank. In English, it's called an admiral, right? A rank in the Navy, and he was called Basha. So the Turks were known for giving these amazing titles. If you go to some of the graves of the people, some famous people in Turkey, you'll find, the person's first name, and there's like 6 titles to it. Now, as all good stories, now he went from being like a sales tradesperson to the leader of the fleet to becoming the governor. He's no longer into these fights anymore. And people got jealous of that. At age 56, Ishaq and Barbarossa, they both were killed in a battle. Now what's something interesting is that Sheikh Bu Muhammad, he actually allied with Prince Charles or King Charles V. He said, you bring in an army, and I think there was an army of 10,000 soldiers that came at the port of Oran. I did not mark that, but I'll actually show you the port. At the port of Oran. Actually, I marked his death place. Let's go there. Yeah, so you see that? So, in the city of Talisman, King Charles, with the help of Abu Muhammad, they got an army together of 10,000 people, and they suddenly attacked Talisman, where the palace of Barbarossa or Baba al-Ruj was, and they actually held, it's mentioned that there were around 5,000 soldiers total. 1,200 were his soldiers, i.e. the Turks, and then the others were people who actually stood up for his defense. These were people, Andalusians, that he had rescued. Not only that, there were so many other tribes and all the other refugees that had come and he had rescued them. They all tried their best to stop that army, but it was of no avail because they were not prepared for it, and there was an attack. And finally, Baba al-Ruj, he passed away. Now, let me tell you, so we talked about Baba al-Ruj. Let's go in Europe now, what was happening. So in Europe, because of all of these conquests that he was doing in Spain, and he was going to, like I've skipped, like if you look at the timeline, I've actually skipped so much. If we go back to the timeline, actually go back. So you see this whole section, there's from here, there's so much missing over here. So I'm like, all of this area that you see over here, I did not mention any stories about that. So that was all conquests that were taking place between 1504, 1505 up till 1510. It was havoc for the European Crusaders. To the extent that if they wanted to put their kids to sleep, they would say that there's this ghost called Barbarossa, who's going to come. You better go to your bed, otherwise he's going to come from the water, he's going to get you, right? And that was stories. Now, to help them feel better, they did something, and the history books, on both sides, mentioned this, and this was really bad, was that when they actually killed him, they took his head as a souvenir. And his head actually made a whole tour on all the Crusader castles and churches. Every church the head went, they would ring the bells, the women and men would come out, celebrate, drink and wine, and they would say that this person has finally died. The nemesis that has messed up our lives is over. And that lasted for 2 years. They kept taking his head around for 2 years to boost the morals of the Crusaders, because they could not do anything to this guy. But the most important thing in Islam is not the person. Right? It's not the person. It's that the mission continues. Whenever we start something, whenever some person starts a true cause, whenever you in your lives start a true cause, the most important thing in that is not you. It's not what I will do. It's what you will do for the others and what will be kept on doing for them even when I'm not around. So he created, even till this day, this is my profession. So I'll tell you how much companies spend in succession. So the last project that I did in Saudi Arabia, we got a new CEO in the company. So that CEO, he says, I don't trust my immediate layer 1 and layer 2, i.e. the 12 reports and then the 24 below them. I don't trust them. So it was me and my director that was tasked to actually do assessments on them. So let me tell you how much those assessments costed. So the total of 22 people were selected. And the company paid $3.2 million to do assessments on these individuals. And the primary idea was that this is called succession assessments. There are many consulting firms that specialize in this. And these assessments were done to ensure that succession of the company, so if the CEO goes, who's going to be the next person? If the chief commercial officer goes, who's going to be the next two in line? And are they ready? And what level are they in? And that's what you find in Baba Arruj, that even after he died, almost 300 years after his death, he had created such an amazing system of succession planning. And I wish that we could figure out what he did, but it was so amazing that for 300 years, the whole Mediterranean was controlled by the Muslims. And one would fall and another would just pop up. And speaking of that, that same year in 1518, when Baba Arruj died, it's not like the Muslims, oh man, it's over now. That same year in November, they went back and took back Talisman. That same year, his brother, Khairuddin Barbarossa, or Khidr. Barbarossa, he went and he got the army together and he said, we're not going to cry about this. That person is gone, he's gone, great. But now we need to carry on the mission. They went back and they drove out Bu Muhammad and they drove out Charles V and his 10,000 armies, and they took over Talisman as the capital, and that became the place where he ruled. Remember I said, let's talk about that castle? Right, so this is a very interesting story. So let me take you to Island of Rhodes first, and then I'll tell you the story. Is it better? Oh, that's what it's more like. Great. So the part of the story, do you see how thick that wall is? Can see that? And that whole city was surrounded. So the siege of the Rhode Islands. Ready for the story? This is something so cool. So 200,000 soldiers under the leadership of Sultan himself. What? Oh my God. You need to get me a new Mac. All right. So under the leadership of Sultan himself, with Barbarossa, with 3 other, it was almost like Avengers. Right? And I was telling him, I said, you know what I should do is I should build up Barbarossa, and then I should do Turgut Rais, and then we should do Sultan Suleiman al-Qanuni, and then we should talk about how all of them came together from all different parts of the world, and how they got together for a greater cause, and they did that. So the island of Rhodes, a little bit of history about that. This was a nemesis for the Muslims and the Ottoman Empire's expansion, because they were they were situated right in the middle of the Muslims, right? So if you think about it, like, it's a bit twisted, the map is upside down, but try to figure it out. This is the Gulf of Arabia. Use your imaginations. Right, so this is Antalya, this is Istanbul over here. So they were right here, amongst the whole Muslim belt. So this was very important to take care of this particular. And over here was the largest Crusaders' army, the Knights of St. John. And they were the biggest army. And they were all huddled in this city that you just saw. So this was the fence of the city, and it's a very big city. Till this day, the walls are there. They did not demolish the cities. So Sultan arrives over there, and the battle actually starts in 1522 in July, when the Sultan arrives. In July, the battle starts. 1 month, nothing happens. The walls are so strong. Then there was a guy called Hassan Basha, if I'm not mistaken. Mustafa Basha, sorry. So Mustafa Basha, right, he basically, after a month, he failed. What they did is they brought huge amounts of gunpowder and they dug tunnels underneath the walls of this castle to actually blow up the walls, and still nothing happened. So Sultan, he actually ordered that, you know what, this person, Mustafa Basha, should be executed. He's like, you know, I trusted you. And this was one of the bad sides of the Ottoman Empire, right? We also have to be very just in that the Sultan was very decisive in his commands. And that's not actually good. Our religion does not teach us that, right? But again, that was the side of history that we still have to mention. Anyhow, he does not die in the story. He goes and seeks, you know, I'm sorry, maaf kar do. And then they said, okay, fine, no problem. So his brother, Ahmad Basha, he takes over. He's also not able to take care of them. In December 11th to 13th, until December, so imagine from July, August, September, October, November, the siege is taking place, you have 200,000, and they're still not able to enter the fort. And the fort that we're talking about over here is here. Because they were such huge walls. So they could not enter. So finally, they had a truce between December 11th to December 13th. The truce was that the Sultan went to the people and said, listen, it's only a matter of time, we're going to take the city. If you guys surrender now, you get to stay in the city, you get to stay in your churches, do whatever. You won't have to pay any taxes for the next 5 years, and you are free to leave the island of Rhodes in the first 3 years after we take over. They all agreed. And then, on December 17th, they broke their agreement. And this, again, they started attacking, and the agreement was that on the 17th, the knights, all the knights would leave. Sultan actually provided 50 ships to them, for them to actually sail to Italy, so they can go and, you know, rehuddle and regroup together, which they did, and we'll see it in the Battle of Barbarossa in Arabic. So basically they went, but they actually broke that treaty, and he was really upset about that. And then, finally, he decided that he's, you know, khalas. So if they don't want to fulfill the commands, it's okay. Interesting thing, even after they broke the treaty, he could have actually imprisoned all of them, enslaved them, as per the you know, warfare rules at that time. But he decided he's not going to do that. He let them stay over there. Many of them chose to stay on that island, even after the Ottoman empires. And today, that, you know, the whole island is under the rule of Turks. Now, let's go back to this, the castle. Remember the castle? Said I'll tell you a story about the castle. Right. So 1522, we were talking about that conquest of siege of Rhodes, island of Rhodes. One of the agreements in the treaty with the people, of the, you know, the Knights of St. John's at that time, was that this castle and few other castles will be handed over to the Muslims. And then this castle in the 1600s, Sultan came and actually prayed. This was a church or a chapel. Then this was converted into a mosque. Now this mosque stayed until the First World War. When the heavy shelling took place, the minar of this mosque was actually demolished. And for almost 7 years, 75 years, no, actually more than that, actually almost 85 years, the minar was kept like that until in 1997, finally, they decided that they're going to rebuild the minar back to its original position. And then, you know, in 2018 Jan, they took this imagery and the minar is still there today. So, after finishing all of this, his last mission, Saleem al-Awwal says to the new Barbarossa, Khairuddin Barbarossa, he says that, listen, sorry, not Saleem al-Awwal, Suleiman al-Qanuni. Saleem al-Awwal has passed away. Suleiman al-Qanuni gives this new command to Khairuddin Barbarossa that you are going to go to the Spanish Inquisitions and you're going to enter and take out as many Muslims and Jews that are being prosecuted over there. Okay? The Muslims were called Moriscos, and the Jews were called Labidos. So there was a specific name that the Spanish gave to these two religious sects, or two different religions, and both were prosecuted. To the extent that when Gharnata fell, the agreement was that when Isabella, she took over Gharnata and the Andalus, the agreement was that the Muslims and the Jews will not be touched, their places of worship will not be touched, they will be regularly allowed to pray their salawat. Quite the contrary, halal food was cut off for the Muslims in Andalus. They were forced to eat pork, both Jews and Muslims. Any sign of, they were forced into Catholicism, and any sign of Islam on them. Some of them, actually, there are fatwas that you find in the books, the Arabic fatwa books that were written, people asking, is it okay for me to rip the Quran and the page of the Quran and fold it and put it in my armpit because I don't want, the the Spanish Inquisitions to come and burn or trample with their feet the papers of the Quran. So it was a very difficult time for Muslims at that time. And people were sending letters to Suleiman al-Qanuni for support and help. So he actually agreed. So what happens in 1529, this small island, all right, I'm going to try to pronounce that because I called a Spanish friend of mine. So it's called Piñón de Vélez de la Gomera. That's only Spanish I know. Okay? I'm like, bro, I need to pronounce this. I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce it. It's like, oh, very easy. I'll tell you. I'm like, okay, tell me. Right. Interestingly, right over here is like an imaginary line. So this island does not belong to the Muslims. It's actually still a Spanish island, but it actually is part of Algeria till today. Even if you look at the image here, you actually see that. So this is Spain, this is Jazair. Why is this shaking? Whew. So anyhow, this part of the island. So this was primarily very, very strategic for him, because if you think about it, let's spin it around. Let's give you a more perspective. So look at where the island is. And this is where he was asked to. So basically he was positioned here. He took over that island. There's a whole story about what happened here, but we're not going to get into that. And basically all throughout this route that you see, and if we go up right here, you guys can see, but it's there. It's called Valencia. So all of this, Malacca, so if over here, this is like the hub of all the Arabs today. Any Arab from the Middle East, when they go to Spain, they all go to Malaga. Right? Malacca, they call it. And all over here, you have Gharnata and these places. So basically, his task was to take the fleets of 24 ships, and over the period of that next 1 year, he rescued more than how many thousands Muslims do you think? Make a guess. Huh? He didn't have like speedboats. But yeah. Huh? Yeah, it's 70,000. So he actually rescued almost 70,000. Now, a little bit about the Spanish Inquisitions. I'm not going to get into details. A lot of you, the adults that are here, go read up on it. It's one of the darkest sides of the European history. Something really interesting, Saleem al-Qanuni, when I was reading that, so yeah, it says 70,000 Jews and Muslims. Something really interesting. When I was reading that interesting khat, or the letter that he has given, he mentioned, like, imagine this ruler that is sitting in Istanbul and his care for the Muslims. He says, and he recognized that many of these peoples that were in the Inquisitions, they had never seen sunlight for years. Now, many of the times when these tortures would take place, they would actually blindfold them so they won't see any lights. So imagine the trauma that the person would have. He can't even see what's going to be done to him, right? Except he experiences the pain. And Saleem al-Qanuni, he mentions to Khairuddin Barbarossa that when you take my brothers out of these positions, when they come out of these, inquisitions, please make sure you do not take them out at sunlight. I'm afraid that they might lose their sight because they have been in darkness for so long. And if you happen to take them out, then please wrap something on their eyes so their eyesights may not be damaged because of the sudden light. You know what happens when you're in the dark and you go suddenly in light, you can't see stuff, right? And subhanAllah, and you realize that, the mercy they had, and then the far-sightedness of, he actually felt that pain to the level that, the official letter that he sent by Sulaiman Qanuni, it actually says to Barbarossa, this command, that don't do this. Make sure this one, thing you better take care of. This is the reason, so a lot of the Jews and Muslims, they were brought to the Maghrib. So this is the reason till today you have Moroccan, Algerian Jews. Because when they escaped from Spain, they had nowhere to go. Many came through Barbarossa, but many actually took their own journeys and came to Algeria. Until this day, you have those Jews that live in that area. Interesting story that happened with me when I was doing my first co-op way back. I think it was 2003. No, it was 2004. And at Young and Eglinton, there's a pizza shop. So I remember going to that pizza shop and I asked this person, is it halal? And the guy started speaking Arabic to me. And I was like, that's very interesting. You're Muslim? He's like, no. I'm like, that's strange. But anyhow, you have this like, how come you speak Arabic? The guy's like, I'm Moroccan Jew. And that is the first time I met a Moroccan Jew. And I remember going back, I'm like, how did he become Jew in Morocco? Right? I had that question at that time. It gets answered way in hindsight, 2 years ago. Anyhow, story about that. Now, this is the last story. I'm skipping a lot of history here. But I thought I'd just bring you some, highlights from this part. Okay? So, between the 1300s to 1600s, so the Muslims are here. This is all Kingdom of France and going down. Now, two things. France has actually allied with the Muslims. Okay? France has allied with the Muslims. So before the Battle of Perosa, France is already allied, and Barbarossa goes and he actually joins hand with the army. And actually, I read the letter itself, like the handwritten letter. French people were using at that time English letters. It's really funny. The letter is in English, and basically it goes and it talks about this letter, and it says, we're so thankful to Sir Khairuddin. It says, Sir Khairuddin, for helping us achieve our mission. The city of Nice where they had, these, the guy who actually drove a car or something, recently when they had these attacks in Nice about 1 year ago, it was a major news. So in the city of Nice, Italians were actually encroaching onto them. So he asked help from the Turks. They went there, and actually, the French were so happy because the Muslims helped them that the French gave the most important strategic port, Toulon, to them. It's not on the map over here, right? So they gave them that map, Toulon. Coming back to the story we were talking about. So Kingdom of Naples, a lot of these kingdoms, Kingdom of Naples, Sicily, where is the other one? Genova, Republic of Venice, and a few others over here. I don't think the names are here. All of these, they got so upset that they actually went to the Pope, which was over here in Rome, in Papals, and he said, listen, we need to do something about it. We can't let Barbarossa, we need to get rid of him. He's becoming too powerful, and we need to do something about it. Right? So what happens? Oh, I'm doing next and forward, but it's not happening because it's not. So around 1536, Barbarossa was commanded to actually go back to Istanbul and take 200 ships. Command 200 ships and go and attack the kingdom of Naples, because they were becoming a real issue, and they were also building up an army. And in those days you have preemptive attacks, so they actually were planning something like that. In the meantime, this is something really interesting. So I want you guys to see this, right? The Pope Paul III, he calls something called the Holy Alliance. This is the first time all these Catholic countries, they got together. There were about 8 countries that got together. The Papal State, the Republic of Venice, the Maltese Knights, the Spain. So in Spain you had Naples and Sicily, both. That was part of Spain at that time. Today all of that is Italy. Okay. Then you have the Portuguese Empire. Then you have the Dutch, whatever that is. I don't know. What is this country today? The upper part. I can't remember. Then you had the Order of St. John's. Remember those guys that actually escaped from Island of Rhodes, and they gave them 50 ships. They went to Italy, and they formed their own fortresses and their whole cavalry and ships. And then the Republic of Genoa. They all got together and created a naval strength of 600 plus ships, in which you had around 162 galleys. So those ships that we talked about, these ships are, there are other ships that are called galleots. So these are quicker action ships. So you can have like 20 people. It's lighter, but it's really faster. And then you have 140 sailing ships, and then other ships. A total of 60,000 soldiers were assembled for this battle. And it was led by the famous Andrea Doria. Oh, by the way, this was the flag that they created of all the countries. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Muslims, they also got together, but not in that numbers. So they had around 120. So he sailed with 200. The 80 or 78 of them were busy with other. So he was only able to get 120 galleys over there. Then he had 12,000 soldiers. The result of this war was something really interesting. Beginning of the war, what happened, and this is a story, Allahu Alam how true this is, that the winds were blowing against Muslims. So i.e. it was very difficult for Muslims to actually sail, because they were being pushed back. So they had to sail towards the wind. It was really good for the enemies on the other side, because they just need to set sails and they come at full speed, and you got the galleys going. And then they had also developed technologies of where you had ships that were galleys and they were sails. So you can get like turbo power, right? Twin turbo. So they got sail turbos going. And they were doing all of that. And at that particular point, he did something, and I was like amazed about this. So he asked all the soldiers, remembering, that hadith of the 3 people that were actually in the cave, and each person says, oh Allah, if I did this, then open the door. Oh Allah, if I did this, then move the stone. And then, oh Allah, if I did this only for your sakes, then move. So he was inspired by that event, and he said to each one that write on a piece of paper something that you had done only for the sake of Allah. And then in the end, ask this dua to Allah that, oh Allah, turn the winds in our favor. And when you get that, bring all those papers to the leaders of each 122 ships and put those papers into the sea. I don't know what mystical event was that, but apparently they said that actually the winds flipped for them. And they actually started, sailing at very fast speed. The battle started, it only lasted 5 hours, and the Muslims won. The Battle of Barbarossa is considered one of the biggest victories of Muslims of that time. So what was the total net loss? 5 hours, the Turks had sunk 86 of the ships, of the 600 ships they had. 48 were burnt, 36 were captured, the rest fled. There were around 8,000 prisoners. For the Muslims, they didn't lose any of their ships. Some of the ships were damaged, but nothing was lost. 400 were dead and 800 were wounded. After this, Suleiman Qanuni actually remembered what they did with Barbarossa, the first one, Baba Arruj, and what they did to his head. And he actually called a statewide celebration. To the extent that all the way to Bombay, all the way to Bombay, the Muslim rulers, they, as the news came, they actually made takbirat about thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this great victory. Interestingly, those takbirat around that time became known as the takbirat of Barbarossa. That every masjid did that, like a thank to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this was something, interesting that happened at that time. Let me show you all of this that I talked about because it's better if I show you guys. So then he basically sailed from here to Istanbul, got those 200 ships, and this is where Barbarossa is. So this is where the battle took place, over here. The Muslims, they actually prevented any of the armies, ships to come and off sail so they can have their armies on the ground because they were already pre-planned for that. And subhanAllah, that battle became one of the biggest things that actually everybody remembers, Khairuddin Barbarossa, amongst the other 39 or 40 battles that he had. We just talked about one big one, but in every battle there's enough information that we have about him. Today, and then what happened is Barbarossa, I talked about this in the beginning, basically he dedicated his memoirs to Murdi Sinan Rais. He was the sheikh that he used to follow at that time. And then the 5 handwritten volumes are known as Ghazawat of Khairuddin, the conquest of Khairuddin. And he died, rahimahullah ta'ala, in 1546. Let me show you his tomb that is there today. So that is the tomb of Khairuddin Barbarossa, rahimahullah ta'ala. Rahmatan wasi'ah. Till this day in this tomb is opened on July 1st every year. I don't know what the significance is for that. I couldn't read up, but the times of opening it says on Google July 1st and 12th of April or something like some dates. Aside from till this day, they have so much reverence for Barbarossa that, subhanallah, any naval mission that starts in Turkey or in Ottoman Empire, they would actually come and they would do a parade over there and they would set off from there till today. So that was a quick, summarized version of Barbarossa. I hope that, you guys get to recognize that, our history, subhanAllah, is filled with these amazing feats. Unfortunately, a lot of this information is not available in English. And whatever is available in English, then that has also been distorted. I'll end with that, inshallah. I think it's people want to pray. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. If you guys have any questions, 2-3 minutes. Questions related to Barbarossa.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, Ustadh Ahmad, for coming and teaching us about the many Barbarossas from our past. This initiative, these story nights, inshallah, we'll be doing them once a month, so we will have one hopefully towards the end of December as well. We encourage you to bring your friends and other kids. It's a great opportunity for us to learn about the other things that are, or the figures from our past that are not easily accessible to us.